In a tall, modern university building, the late afternoon sun poured through the large windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Students moved in hurried steps, carrying notebooks and backpacks, their conversations echoing down the hallways. Among them walked a quiet, unassuming man who pushed a simple cleaning cart. He was the janitor. His uniform was slightly worn, and his shoes bore the marks of long hours spent walking across the polished floors. He moved with a calm rhythm, almost invisible to those who passed him by. The janitor had been working at the university for many years. People rarely noticed him, and those who did often assumed his mind was only suited for cleaning floors and emptying trash cans. But there was more to him than anyone imagined. Beneath his gentle demeanor and quiet work ethic lay a sharp mind, one that loved puzzles, patterns, and numbers. He spent his free time reading old science books, solving equations, and thinking about problems that many professors struggled to understand. Yet he never spoke of this with anyone. It was a secret pleasure, a personal joy that no one could take away. That afternoon, the janitor pushed his cart down the hallway outside the mathematics lab. Inside, a group of students was gathered around a whiteboard, working on a complex equation. Their voices were sharp with frustration. Papers were scattered across tables and chalk dust hovered in the air. The equation they were trying to solve was known for being extremely challenging, even for advanced students. The room was filled with tension, each person competing to find the solution first. The janitor paused just outside the door, his eyes following the lines of numbers and symbols on the board. He noticed small mistakes, minor errors that the students seemed to overlook in their panic. He whispered to himself, though no one could hear him. If they just look at it this way. But he kept walking, pretending to adjust the trash bags in his cart. No one could know he understood any of it. From inside the room, a young man noticed him lingering near the door. He leaned back and laughed. "Look at him," he said to the others. "Do you think he even knows what all that is? I bet he thinks 2 + 2 is hard." The others chuckled, nodding in agreement. Their laughter was casual, but it carried a sharp edge, a mix of arrogance and ignorance. The janitor heard it, but he did not react. He simply smiled faintly and continued down the hallway. Later, as the students continued to argue and scribble on the board, the janitor went about his routine, cleaning windows and straightening chairs. Yet his mind wandered back to the equation. He replayed it in his head, turning it over from different angles, noticing patterns that the students missed. He saw how each part connected, how one small adjustment could make the entire problem fall into place. His heart raced not with fear or anxiety, but with excitement. This was the kind of challenge he loved, the kind that made his mind feel alive. One student came out of the lab, shaking his head in frustration. "This is impossible," he exclaimed. "We've tried everything." Another student nodded, rubbing his forehead. "Yeah, it's like the equation is mocking us." They were so focused on their failure that they did not notice the janitor quietly observing them from the corner. The janitor paused to rest his hands on the handle of his cart. He thought about the problem in simple terms, breaking it down in his mind without the pressure and competition that consumed the students. While they were overwhelmed by the complexity, he approached it with patience and clarity. He could see the solution forming step by step. It was not just about numbers. It was about understanding the logic, the rhythm of the problem. Throughout the week, the scene repeated itself. Every day, the janitor watched the students struggle, and every day, he quietly considered the solution in his mind. He cleaned the floors, emptied the trash, and polished the windows, all while his mind danced with formulas and possibilities. The students continued to mock him when he passed by, making jokes about how a janitor could never understand such advanced mathematics. Their laughter was loud, but it did not reach the janitor's spirit. He did not need their approval or recognition. His satisfaction came from the joy of understanding. One rainy afternoon, the janitor took a break in a quiet corner of the university cafeteria. He pulled out a small notebook from his coat pocket, filled with numbers and equations. No one else paid him any attention. He worked diligently, tracing lines and symbols, testing different approaches. The sound of rain tapping against the windows was soothing, a gentle rhythm that matched the flow of his thoughts. He wrote down ideas, erased mistakes, and tried again, never giving up. Every small success brought a quiet smile to his face. Meanwhile, in the lab, the students were growing more frustrated. They argued and blamed each other, their pride preventing them from admitting the simplicity of the mistakes they had made. They were stuck, unable to see the solution that lay right in front of them. The janitor, in contrast, felt no rush, no pressure. He was calm, focused, and patient. He had all the time he needed, and his mind worked freely, unhindered by ego or competition. Late that evening, the janitor finished his shift and began to leave the building. The students had all gone home, leaving the lab empty and silent. He paused at the doorway, glancing back at the whiteboard, now covered in scribbles and failed attempts. His eyes lingered on the equation, and he felt a spark of excitement. Tonight he would find the key. He would see the path that no one else could see. With a deep breath, he returned to the lab, quietly closing the door behind him. Inside, he pulled a chair to the whiteboard and began to work. His hands moved with precision, his thoughts clear and deliberate. He broke the problem into smaller parts, connecting each step with careful reasoning. Mistakes were corrected, patterns were recognized, and slowly the solution began to emerge. Hours passed unnoticed. The janitor was completely absorbed, his mind fully alive with the challenge. Finally, as the first light of dawn crept through the windows, he stepped back and looked at his work. The solution was complete. He smiled, not for recognition or praise, but for the satisfaction of having solved what had seemed impossible. He quietly erased a few small notes to tidy the board, leaving only the clear path of the solution. Then he returned to his cart and continued his routine, calm and composed, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Later that morning, when the students returned, they were shocked to see the equation solved. They stared at the board, their mouths open, unable to comprehend how it had been completed. The janitor stood nearby, quietly pushing his cart, his expression calm and humble. Some of them looked at him and hesitated, unsure if they should speak. The laughter that had once been so confident now felt foolish and empty. The janitor did not speak at first. He simply observed the stunned faces, the pride of the students beginning to crumble. His joy was quiet, internal, but powerful. He had shown, without words, that intelligence and dedication are not defined by appearance or status. The students had mocked him, underestimated him, and yet he had quietly proven that true understanding comes from patience, focus, and love for the work itself. That day, the janitor continued his work as usual, emptying trash bins and cleaning floors. But the air was different. A sense of respect lingered, subtle but undeniable. The students, for the first time, looked at him not as a janitor but as a person with knowledge, skill, and a quiet strength. The lesson was simple but profound. Never judge someone by their appearance or their role. Wisdom can come from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the quietest voice can teach the loudest lesson. In a tall, modern university building, the late afternoon sun poured through the large windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Students moved in hurried steps, carrying notebooks and backpacks, their conversations echoing down the hallways. Among them walked a quiet, unassuming man who pushed a simple cleaning cart. He was the janitor. His uniform was slightly worn, and his shoes bore the marks of long hours spent walking across the polished floors. He moved with a calm rhythm, almost invisible to those who passed him by. The janitor had been working at the university for many years. People rarely noticed him, and those who did often assumed his mind was only suited for cleaning floors and emptying trash cans. But there was more to him than anyone imagined. Beneath his gentle demeanor and quiet work ethic lay a sharp mind, one that loved puzzles, patterns, and numbers. He spent his free time reading old science books, solving equations, and thinking about problems that many professors struggled to understand. Yet he never spoke of this with anyone. It was a secret pleasure, a personal joy that no one could take away. That afternoon, the janitor pushed his cart down the hallway outside the mathematics lab. Inside, a group of students was gathered around a whiteboard, working on a complex equation. Their voices were sharp with frustration. Papers were scattered across tables and chalk dust hovered in the air. The equation they were trying to solve was known for being extremely challenging, even for advanced students. The room was filled with tension, each person competing to find the solution first. The janitor paused just outside the door, his eyes following the lines of numbers and symbols on the board. He noticed small mistakes, minor errors that the students seemed to overlook in their panic. He whispered to himself, though no one could hear him. If they just look at it. The next day began like any other at the university. with students rushing through the hallways, their heads full of problems and deadlines. But there was a quiet tension in the air, a ripple from the previous evening that no one could quite name. Inside the mathematics lab, the group of students had gathered once more, their conversation low and hurried. They stared at the whiteboard, now filled with a neat solution that had appeared overnight. Whispers filled the room as they tried to piece together how it had happened. The janitor arrived early, as usual, quietly pushing his cart down the hall. His uniform was still neat and his hands steady as he worked. He noticed the students looking at him with subtle curiosity, some still holding a trace of disbelief. He smiled faintly, acknowledging their eyes but not their words, and continued with his routine. Cleaning was his task, but observing the world around him had always been a part of it. He saw not only the messes left behind, but also the pride, the frustration, and the small vulnerabilities of those around him. Inside the lab, one of the students finally spoke, breaking the tense silence. "Did someone stay here all night to solve this?" They exchanged glances, suspicion and irritation mingling with amazement. The room felt smaller, heavy with unspoken questions. None of the students admitted it could have been the janitor. The idea was almost laughable, even as a quiet seed of doubt began to grow. The janitor, meanwhile, went about his work, moving chairs and emptying trash, but his mind remained partly on the equation. He reflected on how he had solved it, not with haste but with patience and careful thought. Each step had been deliberate, each calculation checked and rechecked. He thought about how the students had overlooked small, simple errors, blinded by their pride and rushed to finish. It was a lesson not just in mathematics but in humility and patience, qualities that many overlooked in their pursuit of success. Later that morning, one of the professors entered the lab, curious about the unusual solution. She was well known for her intelligence and patience with students, and she immediately noticed the elegance of the work on the board. "Who did this?" she asked, looking around the room. The students avoided her gaze, unsure of what to say. The janitor paused near the doorway, adjusting a window pane, and looked up. His quiet presence was almost invisible, yet the weight of his calmness was felt. As the professor examined the solution, she began to understand its depth and clarity. This was not the work of a frantic student or a hasty mind. It was methodical, precise, and insightful. Her eyes flicked to the janitor, noticing his attentive posture and the faint smile on his face. She realized in a sudden moment of clarity that the answer had come from him. The students were too proud to admit it, too focused on their own failure to recognize what had been right in front of them. The janitor did not speak, for there was no need. His work had already made its statement. His calm confidence, the quiet patience with which he approached his tasks, and the gentle intelligence that guided him were all part of who he was. He had never needed recognition, and yet he had taught an important lesson about respect, diligence, and the hidden abilities that people often ignore. Throughout the day, small changes began to happen. Some students avoided direct eye contact with him, their pride wounded but their curiosity piqued. Others whispered to each other, speculating about how a janitor could have solved such a difficult problem. The janitor moved through the hallways with his usual rhythm, pushing his cart, wiping surfaces, and straightening chairs. Each action was simple, ordinary, yet carried a quiet dignity. He understood the world in a way others often missed, not through arrogance, but through observation and patience. During his lunch break, he sat on a bench outside the building, watching the students hurry past. They were so absorbed in their own concerns that they failed to notice the quiet brilliance of someone they had overlooked. He smiled faintly, thinking about the equation and the subtle ways it reflected life. Patterns were everywhere if only one took the time to see them. In numbers, in people, in the quiet moments between noise, truth could be found. One student, braver than the others, approached him cautiously. "Excuse me," the student said, voice low and uncertain. Did you solve that equation last night?" The janitor looked at him, eyes calm, and nodded slightly. There was no pride in his gesture, no triumph in his smile, only a quiet acknowledgement. The student's expression shifted from doubt to awe, realizing that the person he had mocked was capable of something extraordinary. Word began to spread slowly through the university. Professors and students alike talked in hushed tones about the janitor and the solution. Some were skeptical, unable to reconcile their assumptions with reality. Others began to see the truth, the quiet power of knowledge and humility combined. The janitor continued his work unaware of the growing recognition. To him, cleaning was still a task, the world still full of small, unnoticed details that mattered more than praise. The students who had mocked him began to feel the weight of their assumptions. Pride had blinded them to the abilities of someone they dismissed. Their laughter from the day before felt foolish in hindsight. They began to reflect on how often they judged others by appearances, by roles, by status, without understanding the depth of their character or the quiet strength of their minds. It was an uncomfortable realization, but an important one. As the week went on, the janitor's quiet influence continued. He moved through the university like a silent teacher, showing through example the value of patience, observation, and humility. Students who were willing to learn, not just from books but from life, began to watch him closely. They noticed how he approached problems, how he considered each step, how he never rushed to judgment. In these small ways, he taught lessons far beyond the classroom. The lab, once filled with tension and competition, began to change. Students worked more collaboratively, listening to each other and respecting ideas regardless of their source. The presence of the janitor had shifted something fundamental, a reminder that brilliance could come from unexpected places, and that true understanding required an open mind and a willing heart. The janitor, however, remained the same. He continued his routine, sweeping floors, emptying trash, and maintaining the quiet order of the university. He found satisfaction not in recognition, but in the work itself and the subtle changes he witnessed in those around him. He had solved the equation, yes, but he had also demonstrated something far more profound, that intelligence and worth are not defined by title or role, but by curiosity, patience, and dedication. By the end of the week, the students had a new respect for him. Some quietly asked for guidance, not realizing they were seeking wisdom from someone they had once dismissed. The janitor offered help in subtle ways, guiding them with questions, showing them patterns, encouraging them to think carefully rather than giving direct answers. In doing so, he nurtured a culture of learning and humility that could not be measured in grades or accolades, only in understanding and growth. Through it all, the janitor's life remained simple, his satisfaction quiet, yet his influence profound. He had entered a world that often overlooked him, and through patience, intelligence, and quiet confidence, he had made an impact that could not be ignored. The students and professors who had doubted him were forced to confront their own assumptions, learning that true ability could appear in the most unexpected forms, and that pride could blind even the brightest minds. Days turned into weeks, and the university continued with its usual rhythm. The students still worked on challenging problems, and professors taught lessons, unaware of the quiet transformation happening around them. The janitor remained a silent observer, moving through the hallways with his cleaning cart, his eyes attentive, his mind always thinking. He had solved the major equation once, but now another problem emerged, even more complicated, one that had stumped both students and faculty alike. Unlike before, this problem seemed impossible, a puzzle that drew frustration and doubt. Inside the mathematics lab, the group of students sat around the whiteboard again, their notebooks open, their pens moving quickly. They argued quietly at first, their voices tense. "This one doesn't make sense," one said, frustration evident. "We've tried every method we know. How can this be solved?" The others nodded, all feeling the same helplessness. The room was filled with scribbles, erased lines, and the faint smell of chalk dust. Each person was trying to prove their own intelligence, but the problem kept slipping away from their grasp. The janitor arrived that morning like any other day. His movements were calm and steady, his presence almost unnoticed. He glanced at the whiteboard and saw the struggles of the students. He didn't rush in to speak or offer solutions. He knew that patience was part of learning. Instead, he quietly organized the chairs and wiped down the tables. All the while, his mind examined the problem from different angles. He visualized patterns, considered possibilities, and connected dots that others could not see. His approach was not hurried or forced. He worked slowly, methodically, letting the solution reveal itself naturally. During a short break, he sat in a quiet corner of the hallway, his notebook in hand. He drew diagrams, wrote equations, and tested small ideas. The students occasionally glanced in his direction, curiosity mixing with lingering doubt. Some wondered how someone so ordinary looking could possess such insight. They whispered among themselves, speculating, but no one dared approach him. The janitor, however, was not concerned with recognition. His joy was in the process, in the act of thinking, in the quiet thrill of solving a puzzle that had defeated so many others. By midday, frustration in the lab had reached a peak. One student slammed a notebook shut, muttering about the impossibility of the task. Another paced the floor, running a hand through their hair, desperate for inspiration. The atmosphere was tense and heavy. The janitor, walking past the doorway, noticed the tension. He paused briefly, observing the students, and quietly whispered to himself, "Sometimes the answer is simpler than you think." Then he continued with his work, his mind already turning the words into patterns, shapes, and connections. Late that afternoon, when the lab was mostly empty, the janitor returned. He carried his notebook, sat in a chair near the whiteboard, and began to work. Unlike the students, he did not panic, did not feel pressure. He approached the problem as he always did, breaking it into small, understandable steps. He wrote down one idea, checked it carefully, then moved to the next. Hours passed quietly. He erased mistakes, rewrote sections, and tested different approaches. Slowly, he could feel the solution forming. The patterns became clear. The logic unfolded naturally, and he could see the path to completion. Night fell, and the university was silent. The janitor, however, remained absorbed in his work. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and the occasional sound of a distant car echoed across the campus. Inside, he worked steadily, a soft glow from the overhead lights illuminating his careful handwriting. Each equation, each step, brought him closer to the solution. His calm determination was unmatched by the flustered students, whose efforts were often disrupted by ego and impatience. He knew the importance of observation, patience, and persistence. These were his tools, sharper than any textbook or lecture. By early morning, he leaned back and looked at the whiteboard. The solution was complete. Unlike the first time, this problem was more complex, more intricate, but he had solved it. A quiet satisfaction filled him, not for fame or recognition, but for the knowledge that he had understood something others could not. He took a few moments to organize his notes, ensuring that every step was clear and logical. Then he cleaned his hands, pushed his cart, and left the lab as though nothing extraordinary had happened. When the students arrived later that day, they were again shocked. The equation was solved perfectly, every step clear and accurate. Some stared in disbelief, their pride wounded by the realization that someone they had dismissed had accomplished what they could not. Whispers filled the room. "Who could have done this?" one asked. Another shook their head, trying to understand. The professor entered, eyes wide as she reviewed the solution. She turned and looked at the janitor, who was quietly tidying chairs nearby. His calm expression told her everything she needed to know. Once again, it was he who had solved the problem. The students were forced to confront their assumptions. They had judged him by his appearance, by his role, and had underestimated his abilities. Their laughter from weeks ago now felt foolish and hollow. They realized that intelligence and insight were not determined by who one was or how one looked. True understanding could come from anywhere, and sometimes it came from the quiet, unnoticed people who observed the world carefully and patiently. The janitor, as always, remained humble. He did not gloat or demand attention. He continued his work quietly, emptying trash bins, cleaning floors, and maintaining order. Yet his influence was profound. Students began to approach him with questions, not just about mathematics, but about thinking, problem-solving, and observing the world. He guided them with subtle questions and gentle suggestions, encouraging them to discover answers themselves rather than giving them directly. In this way, he nurtured a culture of learning, humility, and curiosity. As days passed, the students learned to respect him, not out of fear or obligation, but because they had witnessed his quiet brilliance and steady character. They saw that patience and careful thought could achieve more than pride and haste. They began to apply this lesson in their own work, collaborating more effectively, observing more keenly, and approaching problems with a new sense of humility. The janitor's life remained simple yet meaningful. He continued his routine, finding satisfaction in the small, everyday tasks, and in the subtle changes he observed around him. He understood that true recognition was not necessary to make a difference. Through his quiet example, he had taught lessons of patience, diligence, and respect. The students who had once mocked him were transformed, learning that brilliance and wisdom could come from unexpected places, and that true understanding required an open mind and a willing heart. In the following weeks, another problem arose, this time in physics. The students, remembering the lessons from the previous equations, worked together more patiently. Some looked to the janitor for guidance, inspired by the clarity and calmness he had demonstrated. Though he did not interfere directly, his presence became a source of quiet reassurance, a reminder that knowledge and insight were not confined to titles, roles, or appearances. The janitor continued to move through the university, an unassuming figure with a mind that observed, calculated, and understood. He was a teacher without a title, a guide without formal recognition, and a reminder that true intelligence and wisdom were measured not by pride or status, but by patience, observation, and dedication. He had solved equations that others could not, yes, but his greatest achievement was the lesson he imparted silently, that knowledge could shine quietly, and that humility and perseverance were as important as brilliance itself. The day had come when the university would finally recognize the quiet brilliance of the janitor, though no one knew it yet. It began like any other morning, with the hum of students rushing through hallways, the rustle of papers, and the distant echo of professors' lectures. Yet beneath the ordinary rhythm, a sense of anticipation lingered in the air. Word had traveled through whispers and hushed conversations that the janitor had once again solved a problem that had seemed impossible. The news stirred curiosity and tension among the students and staff alike. The janitor moved through the halls with his usual calm presence, pushing his cleaning cart and glancing at the classrooms. He noticed the students staring at him, a mix of awe, skepticism, and lingering disbelief in their eyes. They had seen his quiet intelligence before, but now the weight of their previous arrogance pressed upon them. Some of them avoided his gaze, unsure how to act in the presence of someone they had underestimated. Others whispered among themselves, attempting to reconcile their assumptions with reality. In the mathematics lab, a meeting had been called. The students gathered around the whiteboard, where the complex equation lay solved in neat, precise steps. The professor, known for her sharp intellect and patience, stood at the front, examining the solution carefully. Her eyes were wide with respect and astonishment. She turned to the students and asked, "Who solved this?" There was a pause, an uncomfortable silence. No one spoke. The students were reluctant to admit the truth, their pride still holding them back. They looked at one another, searching for an explanation, any explanation that could avoid acknowledging the janitor's genius. The janitor entered quietly, adjusting his uniform, his presence almost blending with the ordinary tasks he performed. Yet the room felt different with him there. Every eye followed him, some with hesitation, some with amazement. He moved to his usual corner, standing beside his cleaning cart, his calm demeanor contrasting with the tension in the room. He did not rush, did not demand attention. His work, his intelligence, and his patience had already spoken for him. The professor turned toward him, a quiet smile on her face. She recognized the solution immediately, the logic, the clarity, the careful step-by-step process that indicated a mind both disciplined and insightful. She addressed the students, her voice gentle but firm. "It seems that the solution comes from someone we have all overlooked." She gestured toward the janitor. "Can we acknowledge his work?" The room remained tense for a moment, the students grappling with their pride and the undeniable truth. Finally, one of the braver students spoke, their voice low and uncertain. "It's him. The janitor solved it." The words hung in the air. Some students gasped softly, while others looked away, ashamed of their previous assumptions. The janitor nodded slightly, acknowledging their recognition, but he did not speak. His calmness and humility were part of his power. The room absorbed the moment, the weight of their assumptions and the realization of his brilliance settling in like a quiet wave. The professor stepped forward, inviting him to explain the solution. The janitor moved closer to the whiteboard, his hands steady, and began to trace the steps of the equation. He spoke simply, clearly, without arrogance, explaining the logic behind each calculation. His voice was soft but confident, each word demonstrating a deep understanding. The students listened intently, some leaning forward, eyes wide with wonder. They had studied these concepts for years, yet they had never approached them with such clarity and simplicity. As he spoke, the students began to realize the depth of his insight. He connected ideas in ways that were both elegant and practical, showing patterns they had overlooked, errors they had made, and solutions that seemed obvious only in retrospect. The room was filled with a quiet awe, a sense of respect that went beyond the equation itself. They saw not only his intelligence but his patience, his observation, and the calm determination that had allowed him to see what they could not. Some students approached him with questions, tentative but genuine. They asked about methods, about ways to think about problems differently, about how he approached learning. The janitor responded with quiet guidance, asking questions in return, encouraging them to think for themselves, to observe, to consider carefully, and to persist. In doing so, he transformed the way they approached learning, instilling a sense of curiosity, humility, and diligence. Outside the lab, word spread through the university. Other professors and students learned of the janitor's achievement. They came to see the work, to witness the calm intelligence of a man they had once ignored. Respect replaced doubt and admiration replaced skepticism. The janitor remained unchanged, continuing his daily tasks with quiet dignity, unaffected by the recognition, his satisfaction found in the work itself and in the subtle influence he had on those around him. Throughout the day, the students reflected on their behavior. They remembered their laughter, their jokes, their assumptions. Shame and humility mingled with newfound respect. They realized how often they judged others by appearances, by status, by roles, without understanding their abilities or character. The janitor's quiet example taught them that true understanding and talent were not defined by titles, clothing, or position, but by patience, observation, and dedication. By evening, the university had settled into its usual rhythm. The janitor continued his routine, moving through halls, cleaning classrooms, and tending to the small details that made the building orderly and welcoming. Yet the impact of the day lingered. The students worked with renewed focus and cooperation, inspired not only by his solution, but by the lessons his example imparted. The professor discussed his approach in class, emphasizing the value of patience, humility, and observation. Slowly, a culture of respect and careful thinking began to spread. The janitor, unaware of the depth of his influence, continued as he always had. He found satisfaction in the simple tasks of his work, in the quiet rhythm of life, and in the subtle changes he observed around him. His joy was not in praise or recognition, but in understanding, in observation, and in helping others discover their potential. Through his calm presence and intelligence, he had taught lessons far beyond the classroom, lessons that would be remembered and applied long after the equations were forgotten. The students, now fully aware of their misjudgment, approached him with humility. They asked questions, sought guidance, and listened intently. The janitor offered insights gently, encouraging them to think deeply and to trust their observations. He became more than a janitor in their eyes. He became a teacher, a mentor, and an example of quiet brilliance. They learned that true intelligence was often hidden, revealed not through loud assertions but through careful thought, patience, and unwavering dedication. By nightfall, the university was quiet. The janitor pushed his cart through empty hallways, the soft hum of fluorescent lights accompanying his movements. Outside, the stars shone over the campus, a reminder of the vast world beyond the building. He paused for a moment, looking up, reflecting on the day and the quiet changes he had witnessed. He smiled faintly, not for recognition, but for the subtle triumph of understanding and the knowledge that his work had made a difference. The janitor's life continued in its simple rhythm, yet his influence grew silently. Students applied his lessons, professors respected his insights, and the culture of the university began to shift. Through patience, observation, and quiet intelligence, he had taught lessons that would last far beyond the solution of a single equation. He had revealed that true brilliance often comes from unexpected places, that humility and perseverance are as powerful as talent, and that respect for others should never be overlooked.